AstraZeneca, the one of the largest manufacturers in UK, has now confirmed that they will be producing 800 million doses of vaccine as soon as it is identified and the right fragment in the thread for the vaccine antibody is found out. They've been really backed heavily, I think, in the last few weeks even. US government, they announced a $1 billion investment in AstraZeneca just to ensure that if a vaccine is found out, they get 400 million of those doses straight away. And quite similarly, I think there's a lot of discussion from the UK government. They have funded quite a large scale investment in the company. Bill Gates Foundation, obviously, I think we hear a lot about Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They invested quite a heavy thing. And interestingly, they've signed the deal with the Indian Institute of Serums, the one of the largest manufacturers of vaccine in the world in India. By far, the largest manufacturer of vaccines is in India, obviously, that can produce on scale. So as soon as it is committed, that as soon as new vaccine is found out, they will be producing to a large number. And I think globally, the other really interesting element that is coming up in the news more and more, and we'll probably hear about it in the next few weeks, is the what is known as a plantation season happening across the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, in Pakistan and India as well. So this plantation season is what is known as the Kharif season, the one preparing for the crops in winter. And mainly they are the food-oriented crops that we see in winter coming out. But there's a massive locust attack all across the Middle East, India and Pakistan. Tadi Dal, as it is known in Urdu. And you might have seen it in Pakistan. It's a massive scale attack. In India, it is even double the number that we have in Pakistan at the moment. Even I think many of you might have seen the media in India describing it as one of the attacks from Pakistan for some reason or another, as that Pakistan has sent across locusts as terrorists in India. But it is actually sweeping all the plantations across North Africa, which is really going to impact the manufacturing, well, the plantation of cotton, which is one of the largest exports from Egypt. And Egyptian cotton, many of you might have heard, is one of the leading commodities in the world that is being traded heavily. So if the plantation is going to be impacted in North Africa, across the Middle East, especially in the areas which are known as the breadbasket of Middle East, the Mesopotamian, the two areas between the rivers in Jordan and in Iraq area. So everywhere, it's a major attack of locusts at the moment. No one knows where it came from. Obviously, it is, we know, and once we read Quran and the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we know that many of the different factors that come in any human life, in any capacity, as individuals, as nations, as the whole humanity, are often in either it is a test or it is a circumstance of some sort of a punishment that it is granted on the humans in this way form. So it is massively going to be a different world that we are going to be living up to, especially I think if you consider the plantation season that is going to be impacted in Pakistan. Majority of the crops in the southern regions of Punjab and the kind of northern Sindh area, they've been really badly affected. Even up to all the way up to Okara, you might have seen all the attacks in that region and how the government is trying to facilitate some degree of commitment to the local farmers to come up with a solution for that. But that's not only in Pakistan. India is badly affected. Punjab in India is badly affected. Middle East, as I mentioned, North Africa is quite badly affected. So there's a whole sweeping locust attack at the moment happening across the plantation season. And June, July are the key plantation seasons, if you consider for a number of different crops that make the cycle go around. Elsewhere, I think we all know and hear about what's happening in the US. It is a daily occurrence. It's quite a sad thing to see in a way that I think more than 140 odd cities now have implemented curfews in US. So people were just walking out of the lockdown finally, and now they're back into the curfew with army on the streets in many occasions. And I think, as I mentioned briefly, that there is that element of reporting that is a bit more highlighting the kind of the negative elements within the protest that's happening against the racial abuse, the looting elements, the riots and all that sort of stuff. But on a general scale, the wave of protests have been really massive in terms of people coming out and denouncing the racial discrimination in the US in a systematic manner, or how the general system in the Western countries have somewhat, as they call it, as the institutional racism that it is known across in the Western sense of it. So there's a lot of protest activity going on. I think yesterday, many of you might have seen even President Obama came out of it. He did a town hall, a virtual town hall, and he spoke in depth from more an academic perspective, because he's an ex-lawyer, as many of you might be aware of it, and a professor at the Chicago Booth University as well. So he spoke a bit on the academic perspective as well. He spoke about what are the political realities in US that really create these racial lines of discrimination in the society. But again, I think it is something that is not going to go away so easily. We all know, and even it remained a massive issue. I mean, historically, and it is somewhat very interesting to see the kind of historical elements linked to it. But the slave trade that obviously was the core reason behind so much of the institutional racism that we still see of all the people who were brought in as slaves from the Eastern African or the Western African countries into the European countries, either in the, many of you I think might have read about it, that in the Middle Ages and even up till the 19th century, pretty much, Czech Republic or the area around the Central European, Prague and all the other cities were pretty much the hubs of slave trade in some way or form. And obviously, I think for the good reason or the bad reason, many of the Muslim traders even were the renowned slave traders in the Eastern African regions. You might have seen and read about the stories of traders coming in with a number of slaves and selling them on the markets. So this was, again, a historical issue that obviously when Prophet ﷺ came across, and he really came across as the person who was uprooting the concept of discrimination from the society. And we see it happening in reality. We see Bilal bin Rabah, Bilal Habshi, as he is known as one of the equals, or even the first amongst the equals. You know, if you think about it, he was known as the Sayyidina Bilal by the likes of Umar bin Farooq and Abu Bakr bin Siddiq. And he was an Abyssinian slave, obviously. He came into Makkah as an Abyssinian slave. And the story we all know